Warning: tube amplifiers have lethal voltages inside them. Please do not attempt to build, test, or repair these without understanding and following all safety protocols. Hey y'all! Well, now that we got the board almost done, just waiting on a couple of more parts that we're customizing in it. I've been working on the chassis itself and gutting all that stuff that was in here before. And the first part of the segment, you'll see all the stuff I've pulled out of this thing. Just, yeah, it was like 10 pounds of you-know-what in a 5-pound sack. I mean, it was just, yeah, you couldn't even see what was going on. And, yeah, I know people were saying, 10 years ago, it was a big deal with these things, or a big mod was like, get rid of all the electrolytic caps, put all film caps in it and all that stuff. And yeah, maybe it makes sense for, high-end amp or something. But yeah, if you're going to build something like that, just start over with a new chassis. Don't try to stuff that much crap into an amp that's only an inch tall. I mean, this was made the way it was for a reason. And it was supposed to be just wasn't supposed to be a in-game, Macintosh monoblock kind of amplifier. And if that's what the sound you're looking for, that's the level you're looking at, go buy a Macintosh monoblocks. And don't try to turn this into something that it wasn't. And I think these are going to be good sounding amps. And just love them for what they are. And don't, I'm not going to go crazy with this thing. There may be a few little mods I do to it. I am going to ground the cathodes a little different. I don't like the idea of using this nickel-plated chassis as the return path for the cathode ground. I just don't, that's just, to me, asking for problems. And I know amps of this vintage did that kind of stuff, that they rivet down ground points, or they just connect things to the closest ground and use the chassis like they did in a car. They use, like in your car, there's positive wires going everywhere. They use the car body as the ground. And yeah, that's okay when you're lighting up a light bulb, but this is audio. And we need to be better than that. And so I'm going to be star ground in this amp with all the grounds, and we're also going to be doing a little bit different stuff for the power supply. These have a reputation for just destroying rectifier tubes, and so I think I see why. And some of it was limitations with the original cap, and then it should be in spec for a 5AR4 what they did, but I just don't think modern tubes can handle that. And I'm going to be putting a new old stock rectifier tube in it anyway, probably some kind of made in Japan, maybe a Toshiba or one of those brands that was, I'm trying to think of what that other one was that I've been buying. I shouldn't tell you guys because then it's going to drive the price up on it, so y'all can figure that out. But those made in Japan rectifier tubes are really good, the new old stock ones. So we're going to be doing that, and then, yeah, hopefully I can, just with some little tweaks, I can kind of change this thing up a little bit. And like I think I said in another video, I am going to put a volume pot on it. I've got a little volume knob that should fit in here coming from Youda Electronics. I'll put a link below. They're a great place to buy not only volume knobs, that's where I get my little tube rings from. They've got great deals on vacuum tubes, especially the older PS Vane stuff. They still got a bunch of those KT88-Z tubes, and so that's where I've been buying some of those from, because it's hard to find. I think they've got the 300B-Zs as well, that are those, they're not mesh plate, they're punched plate tubes, but they still sound really nice, especially if at that price point. And so I'll put a link to that, and this is going to be, I'm trying to build this as more of an integrated that has, still just going to have one pair of RCA jacks here in the front, but I want to have a volume knob on it so I can just hook my phono stage directly to this without having to go through a preamp. because I should be able to get the input sensitivity high enough where it doesn't need a preamp. And so, anyway, let me show you around inside this amp, show you what I pulled out of it, what it looks like now, and kind of an overview more for people that have worked on ST70s before, kind of how I'm laying everything out. And then when we're putting the board in, I'll do more kind of close-up video of the different connections and how I wired stuff up. But anyway, let's kind of just do an overview of where we're at on the rest of the amp. So yeah, here's all the stuff I pulled out of this amp. And yeah, some of this just doesn't make any sense. Like, they had these giant wires going across the back of the amp, connect the speaker jack. This is 6-gauge wire. And they used this in several parts of the amp. And that's just ridiculous. And like, there was a whole bunch of connections that were like this, where they had like 6 18-gauge wires going from the cap to the board. And this was the crazy thing. They had like silicone or glued onto the top, hot glued on the top of the amp. And they had these, bypass caps on film caps. And I mean, you got a film cap, you don't need to bypass a good film cap. None of this makes any sense. And then there was, like, look at the RCA jack. I mean, it's a 2-inch long piece of wire, but they ran like 5 strands of it up to the jack. That's crazy. I don't even know what circuit this is, and like what they were doing. Some of this stuff, they just got like jacks sticking up through. I'm not sure if what they were doing. This just doesn't make any sense. So anyway, that's why we tore all this stuff out. These films caps scare me. They look so beat up, and I know if these get like physically damaged on the outside, they can internally short and start eating rectifier tubes, which is a shame because these 47 UF 630 volt film caps aren't cheap, but I don't trust any of this stuff. I'm throwing all that away. Not going to use these kind of connectors on the back, or I'm gonna put these on it. They've got a kit to put these on the back of the amp, so you can have a 4 ohm, an 8 ohm, and the ground, and it has these little boards to put it in the original place. I thought that was really nice. And then we're not using these. For one thing, it's going to be stereo, and I got another little kit that came with some stereo RCA jacks that'll go in the original front position like it's supposed to be. Now these are nice. These are like some 10-turn potentiometers, and so these are like some Borns. These things are not cheap. I've bought these before, and this is a 10K one. So I'm going to have 4 of these once I get both the amps. So these are nice to have, and I've used these before on my 47 amp, especially for like a hum pot on a direct heated triode. So we're going to keep those. And again, I don't trust any of this stuff. So unfortunately, that's all going in the trash can. But anyway, let me show you what the chassis looks like now that I've gutted it. So here's what the chassis looks like after I polished it up. And man, it's shined up like crazy. And if you've never used this stuff, Blue Magic metal polishing cream, or polish cream, it's like the bomb as far as polishing metal. And it made light work of dealing with this chrome or nickel or whatever these things are plated with. I think it's nickel plated. And yeah, it looks great. I mean, and you can see it's like just a mirror finish now. And the other thing I decided to do while I was spiffing everything up, because I got a new cap for the main filter cap that sits here, and I decided to give it a little polish treatment too. Then I didn't get super crazy with it, but this was like 10 minutes with a little Scotch-Brite pad to kind of knock off the high spots, and then did the little Blue Magic polishing cream on it, and it's going to sit in the amp like that. And yeah, have the OG look, and yeah, that's going to work out good. And I'll go over how I'm going to hook this up, I might hook it up just slightly different than Dynaco did to try to make it a little easier on the rectifier tube. I know historically these things have been rough on rectifier tubes, and I think part of it is because of the way they wired up this cap. So we may do that a little differently. But anyway, so outside came out great. It's interesting that this one has riveted in tube sockets. And somebody that knows a lot of the history of these said the riveted ones were factory assembled. See, the front of it says Dynakit. And somebody was saying that the factory built ones said Dynaco on them instead of Dynakit. But definitely got riveted tube sockets. The other one doesn't. It's got the screws and nuts holding it on. And I think somebody added these screws to the transformer stack, probably because it had some hum, and they thought putting some screws in it would help hold the lamination stack together better. I'm not going to mess with it. I mean, it looks a little goofy, but it doesn't look that out of place, so we're going to leave that alone. So the inside. Okay, so let's go over what I've done inside this thing. And the main thing about this video was to show you putting this upgrade board in. And I did pull out all that junk I showed you earlier, and we're really simplifying this amp. I did add this tag strip over here. So this wire coming from the output transformer, the B plus wire, was cut short, I'm sure with the earlier mods, and it wasn't long enough to reach over here to this side of the amp where the capacitor is. And so I added this wire here. We put this tag strip in. This terminal down here is going to be the B plus over here to the output transformer. And then this is the heater center tap capacitor. This amp's got an interesting way of dealing with the heater hum. Instead of grounding the center taps, they capacitor couple them to ground. So these are the heater center taps. This is the little original little ceramic double disc cap, and this is the ground wire. It comes over here to our star ground point, and then this is the center tap for the transformer. It's hooked up here. We got the two ground wires going to our speaker negatives here and here. And not only is that a safety thing, but it's also mandatory for the global negative feedback to work. And so I did buy the little speaker jack plates that Tubes for Hi-Fi sells. And that way I can hook up the 4 ohm and the 8 ohm taps back here. And this is the ground. And it mounts in the same place the original ones did. And we got this IEC connector. And then the other thing that I did, originally this amp did not have a safety ground. And I know some people are afraid of connecting up the chassis to ground. They're saying it's going to create ground loops and stuff. I personally don't feel safe operating a tube amp with no safety ground. And I know, hey, they used to do it back then, but there's a reason why they started grounding the chassis to the house safety ground, and why they started putting 3-prong outlets in houses. When this amp was first sold, most houses didn't even have 3-pin outlets. And so, yeah, people got electrocuted, and so they started adding safety grounds to products that were not double insulated. And this product is absolutely not double insulated. None of my amps are either. And so the only thing that keeps it safe is the chassis is connected to the house safety ground, or the 3rd pin on the connector. So we ran it up here. We put it under one of these transformer nuts with a lug strip that comes over here with this green and yellow stripe wire that comes up to the IC connector. Now normally I go from the hot side of the IEC. You know, there's a neutral and a hot. I go from the hot side to a fuse, then to the switch, then to the transformer, and then have the other side come around and connect to the neutral. But the way this is all laid out, it would have been pretty difficult or a lot of work to redo that. And so I run the hot over here to the fuse, and then I've got the other side of the fuse run up the transformer, and it comes out of the transformer up to the switch, and then to the neutral side of the IC connector. And then I added this little XY snubber cap across the switch so that the amp won't pop when you turn the power off. So the rest of this was just kind of, I reflowed all of these wires going to the tube sockets to make sure that the wires had a really good connection, because I don't know who soldered this or how good a job they did, and want to make sure that that's all solidly connected. These are going to be the 16 ohm leads that go to the negative feedback. We're not going to be hooking them up to the output terminals. They're just going to have some heat shrink tubing and have a wire spliced into them to run it up to our board here that's going to be in the front. The other thing we did, we got a new cap here. This is the 4-section cap. And one of the things that I'm going to do a little differently is how I wire this up. Now, the original ST35 had a 30, 20, 20, 20 was the 4 caps. 30 UF, 20 UF, 20 UF, and 20 UF. Or some people say I should be saying microfarad, but I'm just going to use UF because that's what it says on the cap, and if you guys can't figure that out, I'm sorry. Anyway, this new one is a 20, a 30, a 40, and an 80. Now, the instructions show to hook up the 40 right after the rectifier tube. And personally, I think that's a mistake. These rectifier tubes don't like having that much capacitance as the first capacitor that it sees. Yeah, it filters the AC more, but originally this amp was built with a 30 UF first cap and a 20 UF after that, which if you run the simulation on it, that's some really dirty DC, and they seem to work okay. And being a push-pull amp, it's not as sensitive to that as a single-ended amp is. So I'm going to wire this up with the 20 UF being the first cap. Then it goes through the choke. Then I'm going to tie the 80 and the 30 together. So we'll have 110 UF after the choke. And then finally we have this 2.2K resistor, and we have the 40 UF right before the front end of the amp. And I think that's going to make life easier, not only on this rectifier tube, but also on the transformer. So, the other thing that I added this amp never came with was a bleeder resistor from this capacitor to ground. And so, I've got the 110 UF grounded through a 510K ohm 2 watt resistor here, so that if you power the amp up without the tubes in it, or even if they are, when you turn the amp off, that this bleeder resistor will bleed off any voltage in this capacitor after about 5 minutes or so. So it makes the amp a lot safer. Plus, it gets rid of this residual voltage that's sitting on this capacitor. So if you shut it off and then a couple of minutes later you turn it back on, it doesn't arc out the rectifier tube. So I think that's an important thing. And like I said, we've cleaned up all these pins. I deoxed them, ran a little brush through them, and cleaned them up as good as I could. And so that's pretty much it for like restoring the power supply and the wiring back to what it was before somebody put all those film caps in it. So here's the new board, and it's going to sit in here like this. Now I am going to have to be a little creative because these are riveted in. all these tube sockets. I want to keep the original rivets in. So instead of doing like the double nut thing that the kit shows to do, because you have to take these sockets out to do that, I'm just going to put some washers between this board and the chassis. And I'm still waiting on the final 2 coupling caps, so we can't wire this board in yet, but the RCA jacks are going to go up here in the front. I'm going to put a volume pot right here. And then on these caps, you want to roll these back a little bit so it gives you a little room for these front tube sockets. And then I bent over these bottom pins that I'm not going to be using to give me some clearance for these coupling caps. You know, you might want to put them on the top. I decided to put all the caps underneath like we talked about in an earlier video. It makes the top of the board really clean. And yeah, I just think it's going to look better. Plus, it's going to keep the caps away from the heat. So the final thing that I'm working on right now is how I want to ground the cathodes of the output tubes. I do like that they use the pin 6 that's unused as a tag point for this grid stopper that they've added. And that you would hook this board wire up to pin 6, then it goes from this grid stopper resistor to the grid, and that makes a real nice clean installation. Now, one of the things I saw that they did, and I think the original one did too, is it grounded the cathode through the sense resistor or the shunt resistor, which is the 10 ohm resistor, to these little terminals on the tube socket. I do not like using the chassis as a return ground path for anything. It does not have the same conductivity as a copper wire, and you're just asking for ground loops, hum, problems, that kind of stuff, using the chassis as a return path for anything related to the signal. So I'm going to run the wire that they show you to run from here up to this front 8-pin socket for checking the bias. And then I'm going to run a 10 ohm resistor from that pin to this unused pin here. And then I'm going to do the same with the one diagonally from it. I'm going to run this over to the cathode, and then a 10 ohm resistor, and then this is going to be the ground point for the tube cathodes for each channel. Be this pin and this pin, and then I'm going to run a ground wire from here over to our star ground point. And that's a little different than the instructions show. It's definitely different than the way the stock one was. And I don't know, I guess running the ground through the chassis worked okay, but it's not the way I wire up amps, and so I'm not going to do it on this either. And so that's something a little different we're going to be doing. And I'll get a little closer zoom in shot of that when we get to working on this front board. I'm trying to give you more of an overview without zooming in and out and moving all over. I'll probably do a little more detailed video showing some of this stuff in the future, but yeah, this is kind of where we're at. Like I said, I'm still waiting on this coupling cap to come in for the interstage coupling cap. And yeah, once we get that in, get some washers and hardware and stuff. It comes with some screws, but I need to find some washers the right size so I can bolt the boards in. And yeah, we're getting pretty close. So the other thing too that I noticed, and this is just me being really picky, I really like using really high precision resistors and like half-watt ones for the cathode sense resistor. Using a 0.1 precision 10 ohm resistor for the cathode means that when you're measuring the voltage, you're getting really close to what the actual milliamps are on the tube, which is what's important. And the two tubes on the same channel need to be set as close as possible. And if one of them's 9.6 ohms and the other one's 10.1 ohms, you're not going to get an accurate balance. And the other thing is using a 1/2 watt resistor. If the tube does go into nuclear meltdown, it'll pop that resistor instead of frying a bunch of other stuff in the circuit board. Because by the time the red plating tube blows the fuse, it's killed something like an output transformer to do that. So anyway, like I said, gonna keep moving along here. When I get this finalized, I'll draw up a diagram for the power supply. Oh yeah, one other thing. After I get done with the amp and after I listen to it and get kind of happy with the way it sounds, I want to try adding another 100 UF of capacitance to the B plus power supply that's going to the output tubes. And given that this is a push-pull amp, it does put a lot more strain on the power supply, especially at higher volume levels and transient hard-hitting notes and stuff. And I want to see if I can hear the difference in stiffening up the power supply, adding another 100 UF, probably go from here to this ground point right here, and just put a little electrolytic cap here and see if adding some capacitance helps stiffen up the power supply and help the bass response. So anyway, I think this is a good place to wrap up this kind of overview video of where we're at. Well, I hope this kind of shows you where I'm at trying to bring this old girl back to life. And I was going to show you this too, these ugly stands that you guys were telling me to throw away. You stack them both up and it makes a perfect little work stand for working on the inside of one of these. And probably it would work with a lot of amps. And then the transformers and even with the tubes and stuff can all go through it, and it's not going to hurt anything. It's not going to mess with that can cap or any of that stuff. So these little stands actually did turn out to be useful, and I'm going to be keeping them. So you guys that were telling me to throw them away, y'all were wrong. They do have a use, just not as a stand. They're more of a work stand. Anyway, so I want to get the board totally finished up, get it mounted, and I'll go over like these grid stoppers, how to mount them up, how I'm doing the cathode shunt resistors for the bias settings, and I'm going to be using a couple of pins off this 8-pin. There'll be 2 on each. One will be for the front tube, one for the back tube, and then it's got 4 bias adjusting pots, which is one of the bonuses to this board is you can set all 4 tubes bias individually. So we'll be going into that, showing you how I'm wiring that up, show you my little schematic of the power supply. I've simmed it up. It should work great. We do have some potential other mods to do after we get the amp up and running. But first, I just want to get this thing working and get it reliable and see what one of these things sounds like. I mean, they've been making these VKA boards for a long time. I just feel like if they were junk, they wouldn't still be making them and people wouldn't be buying them. And there's a lot of people online that say they sound great. And so I know I got poo-pooed on a little bit when I went on one of the forums saying that I'd bought this board, and they were like, oh, that's not the good board. And I'm like, man, everybody's got their own idea what the best ST70 is, and so I'm not going down that rabbit hole. I know there's people that spend a career fooling with these amps, trying to make them just like that R8. I'm not going down that road again, like putting custom ISO transformers and doing crazy stuff. This is going to be what it's going to be. And from everything I've heard, this is good iron that they came with. And this is the OG cloth covered wire, which I've heard is kind of coveted. But then I hear other people saying the new iron's better. So who knows? Anyway, this is a fun project. And I'm glad that I didn't start from scratch and just buy a new kit. I think it was fun trying to keep these 2 amps out of the landfill. And with the second amp, we may try something different. I may just do this one like it is, and then use the other one to do other mods to, and then I can A/B listen to the difference of them. That might be a good idea. So, because it's got the screw-in You know, instead of riveted, it's got the screwed in tube socket, so I can put new tube sockets. It's got the taller stack transformer, not the big one, but it's got the medium one. So it might be a better one to mod up and just keep this one more stock. So anyway, again, I want to say this is not sponsored by Tubes for Hi-Fi. Dan's probably laughing going, you say that in every video, but he made that comment in a video. So I want to make sure you guys are clear that this isn't, I'm not some affiliate, whatever, with Tubes for Hi-Fi or got any kind of deal with him. I was just a customer and ordered the parts from him. I want to support another small company like Skokie Designs, and I know they've been around a long time, and you know, this is a great service they provide, and I have a feeling this little amp may be added to my list of good tube amps under $1,500 to buy, especially the kit one. Definitely going to be in that price point. I think you can get them for $1,000. I'll have to look. Could be wrong. I'll put up here if it's different. But anyway, thanks again for watching my channel. Hope you're enjoying this content. If you are, please subscribe to the channel. Please like the video. Consider joining my Patreon, even if it's only $5 a month or something. It really helps me out. Also, got an affiliate link to Amazon that even if you're buying paper towels, if you use that bookmark, it helps my channel out instead of just helping out Bezos and his rockets or whatever they're doing with all the billions they're making. So if you want to do that, that helps my channel out too. So anyway, we should be working back on this thing soon. And until then, have a nice day.